Hello. Welcome to week 3 of Reconciliation in Romans. Today I want to tell you about my friend Casey. She's one of my closest friends. I've known her for about 6 years, and she's dealing with the issue of reconciliation in an extraordinary way. And I believe that understanding her story can help us see various nuances when it comes to reconciliation. So Casey is in her early 30s. She is married to a man named Dylan. She and Dylan are living with her dad to save up money to buy their own home. And Casey works with underprivileged kids, especially youth in an area of Salem where she lives that has a lot of crime, a lot of gang activity, and quite a bit of human trafficking. So her heart is to minister to the poor and underprivileged. When our friendship was new, Casey asked me about my work with human trafficking, and she asked me to define the whole situation. Like, how do you define sex trafficking in particular? So I told her about it, and she looked at me and she said, "Sarah, I think that I am a survivor of human trafficking." And she told me her story, and I confirmed, yes, indeed, you are a survivor of human trafficking. This is one of the worst cases I've heard of, actually. Her story goes like this. When she was born, her mother had a psychotic break and developed schizophrenic symptoms. 30 plus years later, she has never gone back to what they believe was normal. She is still severely schizophrenic, homeless often, living with strangers, living out of her car, and she is just very, very sick. And this happened as she was giving birth to Casey. So Casey's mom and dad had a divorce when she was very young because of the severity of the illness. Casey's dad lived in Arizona, and Casey's mom moved up to Washington. Her dad was sending money to the mom to care for Casey, but the mom misspent the money on various vices, and they were often left destitute, living in cars and hotel rooms, and just trying to make ends meet in a number of different ways. So her mom, in an effort to take care of Casey, in her line of thinking, there was a way that she could do that very easily and very succinctly, and that was to sell Casey to pedophiles. Sometimes just for an afternoon, but other times up to a week at a time. The pedophile would take Casey home, dress her up like a doll, tell her she was pretty, rape her, and then send her home to her mom. That marked Casey's life. That was her childhood, over and over and over again being sold to pedophiles. When Casey would get home, she'd call her dad crying. Her dad's response was to weep over the phone and tell Casey, "Let's pray about it. Not I'm coming to get you, not I'm calling 911, but let's pray about it." Now, I believe in the power of prayer. I believe. But when there is a practical need that we can meet, sometimes we are that answer to prayer. So besides selling Casey, her mother would devise torturous ways to punish her for normal childhood antics. She would cut her. She would smear dog poop on her. She, at one point, poured Drano down Casey's throat. Casey now has a tube in her esophagus to help her breathe. She would go missing from school for a week at a time. She was in and out of the hospital, and one of the greatest injustices to Casey's story is that no one asked questions. Teachers, doctors, nurses, healthcare professionals, no one asked why this child was in and out of the hospital and why this child was missing school for a week at a time. The police were never at the door. The social system failed my friend. It failed Casey. Both of her parents should be in prison by all rights. But neither of them have been prosecuted for the crimes brought against Casey. When she was 18, she left her mom to go to college. She became a Christian and got heavily involved in her local church. And at first, Casey completely cut off her relationship with her mom. Her mom had no idea where she lived, what her phone number was, anything. She was just gone. But as she became closer to Jesus, she realized that if her mom was ever going to know who Jesus was in a personal and intimate way, Casey wanted to be the one to show her what forgiveness and reconciliation looked like. So while in counseling and being mentored, she began to re-engage her mother. After college, Casey moved to Salem where her dad lives because she wanted reconciliation with him too. This has been difficult because when she confronts him about her childhood, he weeps and says he doesn't know how to fix it, so he doesn't want to talk about it. Like I said before, she lives with him and has for several years. They're trying to carve out a new life together. Casey's mom remarried after Casey moved to Oregon. She married one of Casey's rapists. Knowing what he had done, knowing that he had been part of the problem, she married him because he was a means to an end financially. As their marriage began to crumble, she blamed Casey, saying that he still wanted her daughter and that's why their marriage wasn't working. She put all the blame on Casey. They divorced a few years ago, and Casey's mom moved to Oregon to be near Casey. And Casey would see her occasionally, depending on whether or not her mom was having a, quote, good day. Casey told me recently that her mom is living with another of Casey's rapists now. She's back in Washington. Her mom is suicidal on and off. She calls Casey when she is suicidal, and Casey is torn. I mean, utterly gut-wrenchingly torn, because she doesn't want her mom to commit suicide, but she knows that life would be a lot easier if she was dead. Now, Casey is married to a man who is passionate about helping kids and women in domestic violence situations. When I first met him, I asked him, "How did you feel when you met her mom?" And he told me that he wanted to murder her until he actually met her. Then he saw a very sick woman who desperately needs the hope of Christ. He now has pity for her and wishes her no harm. Casey and her husband have a little boy now. They didn't mean to get pregnant. They, of course, love and appreciate their son and are so happy that he is there, but the timing was not what they had planned because they thought to themselves if they waited to bring life into the world until after Casey's mom was gone, then they would have an easier time and a better time raising this child without the complications of a very sick woman trying to butt in. However, they did get pregnant. They do have a son, and now Casey's mom is so broken and trying to interrupt their life, and they're trying to protect the life of their baby boy. So it's further complicating things. They're still navigating this narrative. They're not sure yet exactly what this relationship will look like between a grandmother and a grandson, but they do know that she will never be allowed to be alone with him. Her mom still doesn't take responsibility for her actions. Half the time she doesn't know what she did was wrong, and the other half of the time she puts the blame on Casey. It was because of Casey that she did these things in her mind. So Casey bears the brunt of the fault and the responsibility. So both of Casey's parents have rejected responsibility. Both of Casey's parents love her in their own way and want to see her live a nice, good life. They have just approached this very differently. They're trying to figure out, Casey and her husband are trying to figure out what life looks like as a married couple in a covenant relationship with one another and with God, but also in this extremely dysfunctional family. So several things come to mind when I think about Casey and her search for reconciliation with her parents. The first is the parable of when Jesus talks about forgiving someone 7 times, 70 times. This leads me to the question, how much is too much? Do we take 7 times 70 literally? Because in 30 years of living this horror, Casey has probably met that number. Or do we take it figuratively and believe that God calls us to unendingly forgive and work towards reconciliation? So another question that I ask is reconciliation even possible between Casey and her mom? Is it possible between Casey and her dad? Is this something she should be pursuing as a Christ follower? I've wrestled with these things for a number of years, especially as I'm teaching this class, because I ask my students to engage with her story and be a part of a community that prays for this young woman and her family. So I ask that when you're in the forums this week, engaging with some of the questions that I pose, I ask that you come to the table with a great deal of grace and love and patience for my friend, that you would handle her carefully and with love above all else, and that we would also be reflective of the fact that there are some members in our class who have also dealt with extreme trauma. I pray that no one in the class understands the depths of the darkness that Casey has felt and faced, but we all have trauma to a degree, and so it is my prayer that none of what I have talked about is a trigger for you, but that our classroom discussions can be an opportunity to minister to one another as well. So I look forward to seeing you in the forums. I appreciate you. Thank you for letting me share the story, and thank you to Casey for letting me share her story. I'll see you soon.